What do you do when you find a letter proving your father remortgaged the family home while your mother was lying in a hospital bed, unable to check the post? I told my dad I knew what he had done. He didn't deny it right away. He just went very still. The specific stillness of a man deciding whether lying is even worth the effort anymore. Then he told me it wasn't gambling. Not really. My name is Emma. I am 31 years old. And until this March, if you had asked me to describe my dad, I would have used words like steady, if a little checked out. The kind of husband who let my mum run the household for 32 years. Not out of laziness exactly. More out of a long-settled arrangement neither of them had ever really questioned out loud. My mum had emergency surgery in March. Serious, unplanned, with complications nobody had expected going in. What should have been a straightforward recovery turned into 3 weeks of setbacks. Infections. A second procedure. A level of physical exhaustion in her I had never once seen in 31 years. I visited most days. I sat through the physio sessions that left her shaking. The long, silent afternoons where neither of us had the energy to talk. The nights she was too frightened of the pain to sleep. A nurse named Bridget, who had worked that ward for 16 years, quietly decided not to notice the clock when I stayed past visiting hours. About halfway through, my mum drifted in and out of a morphine-thinned half-sleep and asked me out of nowhere whether Alan was managing all right at home, whether he was eating properly, whether he remembered which day the bins went out. I told her he was doing fine. I meant it completely. As far as I knew, it was true, and I want to be honest about how moved I felt watching my dad finally step up during those 3 weeks. For most of their marriage, the household had run almost entirely on my mum's labor. She managed the finances, the bills, the calendar, the small daily logistics of 2 adults sharing a life. My dad, semi-retired from regional sales, occupied himself with the garden and the golf club and a general comfortable vagueness about anything requiring sustained attention. So when he suddenly took over the house, cooking, keeping the place tidy, handling the small admin of daily life, I found myself telling friends he had finally grown into himself a bit. That maybe this was the version of my dad who had been in there all along. Never once thought to ask what he was doing, with all that unsupervised time back at the house. That sentence is the actual hinge the whole story turns on. There were signs before that March. I filed every single one of them away the way people do with things they are not ready to look at. Directly, 18 months earlier, I had been setting up a streaming app on my parents' shared tablet and noticed, scrolling past, 3 separate betting apps installed in a folder labeled, with a kind of dark irony I did not appreciate at the time, utilities. I asked my mom about it lightly. She said my dad had always had a flutter on the football. Nothing serious. I accepted that answer more or less at face value. I told myself it wasn't my business. I have come to recognize that phrase as the exact sentence people say to themselves right before something becomes very much their business. Indeed. About a year later at my mom's 60th birthday dinner, my dad excused himself twice in an hour to check his phone in the hallway, coming back each time slightly too quickly cheerful in a way that struck me even then as a fraction too performed. I made a joke about him being addicted to the football scores. He laughed and the subject closed. 4 months before the surgery, he asked to borrow £800, an unexpected car repair, back within a fortnight. I gave it without much thought, the way you do for a parent who has given you far more over a lifetime. The money was never repaid. I never chased it. I never connected it to anything. Our next-door neighbor, Trevor, a retired bank manager who had lived beside my parents for 20 years, mentioned to me in passing at the garden fence that he had noticed my dad's car parked outside the betting shop in town more often than you would think, for a man who says he barely gambles. Delivered lightly, almost as a joke. I laughed it off, said he was probably just popping in for the football coupon. I remember Trevor's face doing something slightly uncertain before he let the subject drop. I found the letter about a week after my mum came home, helping her go through 3 weeks of accumulated post, while she sat still fragile in the armchair she had been using since coming home because the stairs were still difficult. Most of it was ordinary until I got to an envelope from the mortgage lender. Inside, a letter confirming a new agreement dated the 2nd week of her hospital stay. The house remortgaged for £40,000. My dad's signature, the only one on the document. My mum's name absent entirely from a document about her own home, taken out during the exact 3 weeks she was lying in a hospital bed, unable to ask him a single question about it. I called our cousin Zara that evening, a solicitor who specializes in property law. I asked her as evenly as I could manage whether that was even legal, one spouse remortgaging a house without the other's signature or knowledge. She told me yes, technically, if the house was solely in one person's name, which it was. My dad's before they married, kept in his name throughout the marriage for reasons that had never seemed significant until that exact phone call. She also told me gently that legal wasn't the same as fine. I didn't say anything to my mum. She was still fragile, still sleeping through most afternoons. I waited almost a week before I found my dad in the garage on an ordinary Tuesday while she napped upstairs. I told him plainly I had seen the letter. I wanted to know where 40,000 pounds had gone while his wife was lying in a hospital bed, unable to ask him a single question about any of it. He went very still. Then he told me it wasn't gambling. Not really. He had been trying to win back money he had already lost so my mom would never have to find out any of it had happened. He said every bet had felt, at the time he placed it, like the last one he would need to place. I told him I already knew about the betting apps, had known for close to 2 years, had said nothing because I had decided it wasn't my business, and that I was only now starting to understand how expensive that assumption had turned out to be. I asked him if he understood what he had actually done. Not the gambling itself, but the timing of it, the specific deliberate choice to use the 1 3-week window in their entire 32-year marriage where she couldn't check the post, couldn't ask a question, couldn't stop him from putting her own home on the line for a debt she didn't know existed. He said he had been planning to pay it back before she ever noticed. That the plan had made perfect sense at 3 a.m, sitting alone in that kitchen while she lay in a hospital bed 2 miles away. I told him that wasn't a plan. That was hoping nobody got caught before the lie ran its course. He sat down on an upturned crate and put his head in his hands. And for a long moment, he genuinely didn't look like my dad at all. Just a tired, frightened man who had finally run out of road. What came out over the following hour was bigger than 40,000 pounds. The betting had started closer to 4 years earlier than I had realized, beginning around the time he took semi-retirement and found himself for the first time in decades with long, unstructured afternoons and no routine to fill them. Small amounts at first, 10 or 20 pounds on a Saturday match. A harmless-seeming hobby that gave shape to hours that had started to feel shapeless. The 800 pounds I had lent him for the car repair had gone into an online betting account. Within 6 hours of me transferring it, there was a credit card my mom didn't know existed. 6,000 pounds. Minimum payments only. The balance climbing quietly every month. Covered from a pension drawdown she also didn't know he had started accessing early. And a second card, previously undisclosed, maxed out. The warning letters sealed in a drawer in the garage he kept locked. A drawer I had walked past 100 times without ever wondering what was inside. Each new piece of information landed on top of the last like another stone added to something already too heavy to lift cleanly. The 40,000-pound remortgage wasn't an isolated, desperate act committed in a single blind spot. It was the largest visible peak of something that had been quietly running underneath their entire marriage for years. The hospital stay hadn't created the problem. It had simply given him the first genuinely private 3 weeks in over 3 decades to solve it his own way, badly, alone, at the exact moment his wife was least able to stop him. I told him my mom deserved to know all of it on her own timeline. That I wasn't going to be the one to tell her. But that I also wasn't going to help him hide any further piece of it either. He nodded slowly, still not looking up from his hands. My mom found out 2 days later. From him, sitting at their kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon while I was deliberately 30 miles away at my own flat, giving them the privacy the conversation deserved. He called me that evening, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. He told me the outline of what he had said, all of it. The 4 years, the betting apps, the credit cards, the pension drawdown, the remortgage, the timing of it during her hospital stay. He said she hadn't shouted at him, which he seemed to find almost more unsettling than if she had. She'd gone very quiet instead, asked a handful of precise practical questions about exact figures and exact dates, and then told him she needed some time before she knew what she wanted to say back to any of it. I called my mum myself later that evening. She was calm in a way that worried me more than tears would have. She asked me directly how long I had known. I told her the truth. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I have turned over many times since, that she wasn't angry with me for not telling her immediately. She understood exactly why I had waited, but that some part of her wished, just once in 32 years, someone in this family had told her the truth about something difficult while she still had the strength to hear it standing up. Rather than always managing the timing of it around how fragile she happened to be at that particular moment. My brother Callum flew back from Canada about 10 days later, at my mum's request. Something she had never done before, not even during the surgery itself. He told me the first night he was back that he had glimpsed a betting app open on the shared tablet during a video call once, before my dad closed it quickly and made a joke. Callum had said nothing either. From 4,000 miles away, it hadn't felt like his place. He had also lent my dad 400 pounds for what was described as a boiler repair. Same as my 800. Same story. Same destination. 3 completely separate observations spanning continents and years. None of them ever making it into the same room as any of the others until a mortgage lender's letter did the work. None of us had been willing to do ourselves. My mom has seen a financial advisor now who specializes in what the industry calls financial infidelity, a term I hadn't heard before this March. I have thought about it often since because I think it is a genuinely accurate name for what happened. Closer in shape to a betrayal of trust than to an ordinary money problem. My dad has started attending a peer support group for problem gambling twice a week. He mentioned once, almost sheepishly, that he was the oldest person in the room by a decade, and that it had taken him 3 separate sessions before he said a single word out loud to the group. I found something in that small admission more convincing than if he had come home from the first meeting declaring himself instantly transformed. My mom checks the post herself now. And the banking app she had never once opened in 32 years of marriage checked most mornings with her coffee. A new, small, watchful habit I understand completely and wish for her sake she had never had reason to need. I still visit daily. Some days feel almost normal, the crossword together, her laugh coming easily at something on television. Other days I catch her staring past the garden fence, doing arithmetic of her own that I don't ask her about. Because I understand now that some sums take a great deal longer than a single conversation in a garage to finish. My dad said something to me recently, sitting in the garden while my mum napped upstairs, that I have decided to hold on to cautiously as a small real sign rather than another performance. He said he used to think the worst part of what he had done was the money itself. The specific number, the concreteness of the debt. He said he understood now that the actual worst part was smaller and quieter than that, and harder to fix with any repayment plan, that for 3 weeks, while the person he had promised to look after for the rest of his life was fighting to recover in a hospital bed, he had spent his nights alone in that kitchen thinking almost entirely about himself, about his own fear of being caught, his own plan to fix things quietly, his own 3 a.m. arithmetic, and barely at all about her. He said that was the sum he was still working on, the one no financial advisor could help him with, and the support group could only help him start. I told him that was, as far as I could tell, the first completely honest thing he had said to me since the whole thing began. And that I intended to keep watching closely to see whether he kept saying things like it long after the initial shock of being caught had worn off and there was no longer an audience left to perform for. That is the whole story. That is exactly as complicated and exactly as simple as it is.